Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. My name is Ben McLeish, and we are looking at the latest developments in the Altmetric database today, which have been amongst the most requested features over the 4 years that I've been talking to people about this. My name is Ben McLeish. I do outreach and engagement for Altmetric and for a related system called Dimensions at Digital Science. That related system actually has quite a lot of bearing on what we're talking about today. A quick rundown of housekeeping. We are recording this webinar. I checked. It has been the case before that I've forgotten. We will supply this afterwards, so if you do have any temporary audio or visual issues which you're experiencing, don't worry, you will have the 4K HD version coming to you shortly, and we'll be putting it on YouTube as well. There is a Q&A box in the GoToWebinar software, which you can use for questions. I will look at these questions at the end because it's quite tricky seeing them as you're also presenting, but do feel free to put them in there. If there are any other notes, there is a chat box there where you can communicate with other users as well and with myself. And I think that is about it. We will get going on today's new features. They broadly fall into two categories. The first one is that we have updated the Altmetric service so that we can now show affiliation data within the database. I'll explain why this is quite a big deal for people, because back in the old days, Altmetric was essentially a very large, undefined database. It could break down attention, of course, by type of attention, whether it's from social media towards research, whether it was from news or blogs towards research. And we could break it down by journal, because, of course, that data was in there as well. But one thing that had always been difficult for us was where to get the affiliation data from. Some affiliation data coming from some publisher websites is very good. In other places, it's entirely absent. And so it's very, very tricky to sort of get a hold of who has written what. But it was far and away the largest question people had when they came to our service. Not only can we see our own publications broken down by our own internal authors and broken down by our own internal departments, but outside of that, could we just get a sense of what University of X has published? And that was something that we have wanted to work on for the last few years, like I say. The second major update is that we are now also categorizing the research itself according to the field of research it falls into. And I'll explain how we've done that. And both of these sort of updates both belong within the realm of what the Dimensions team at Digital Science has been doing over the last 2 years. Then I'm not going to do death by PowerPoint like I just said on Twitter. There are 10 slides in all, and we've gone through 2 of them already. So I will then just jump into the system, and I will show you how you can look for any research around a field of research, whether it's in genetics, whether it's in literary studies, which is, I think, is the one that I'm going to do, and then show how affiliation search actually works, comparing the attention that your institution has received to what another institution of perhaps comparable size or a much bigger or much smaller institution has out there as well, and then how you can actually group multiple institutions together. So you could, for example, grab all of Oxford and Cambridge research and save that as a group and keep an eye on it. Or perhaps you belong to the Russell group and you want to add several more institutions together and you want to sort of track that. And then I'll also show you how you can, if you have an instance that has your own publications as a sub-filter within the database. So you can see, your own institution's publications, which you have identified via us either connecting to your current research information system like Elements or Converis or Pure. You can also see what the overlap is with other institutions as well. And that would give you an idea about how the attention from a collaborating institution perhaps might behave. So we'll look at those use cases. So this was, like I say, the missing piece. Adding affiliations data to Altmetric is an extremely difficult task. It is one that has required us to actually build quite a bit of tooling on the back end of Digital Science so that we can do this. So as I said previously, we had this Altmetric database that was largely an undefined collection of publications, the various attention they've received, broken down by journal. We can break it down by geographic demographics, so we can tell you where the Twitter audience is coming from, where the news sources are coming from that are talking about your data, where the policy organization is based that is interacting with your data. But it was really 91 million mentions of 22 million different research outputs. There are actually 18 different sources of attention if you include the book reviews and the open syllabus project, which don't appear on the sort of the large left-hand image that you see there, which is scoped to the previous year's attention. And so within that database, the first step we had taken back when we launched in 2014 was, well, we can take this database, which previously was used by publishers, and we can implement a view of it that would give you your affiliation. And we could do that because we would rely on you as a customer to be able to tell us either via an Excel spreadsheet, which you can now actually upload directly to the system, or via a current research information system or a repository, the identifiers, the author names, and the departments that they were from. That's it. The identifiers were already in our system, but you were essentially defining what your affiliation was. And that was the old way. You can see on the right there, this is what the interface would look like if it was entirely unscoped. There are essentially 12 million mentioned items there from 22 million research outputs that we're tracking, and that was it, really. Unless you also had a structure that showed you your affiliation, that was it. We couldn't tell you any other affiliations around there. And that was, like I say, due to the fact that there was no good source of truth for this that we had access to or that we could rely on for this. And so what we did 2 years ago was to build a system called Grid. This is a large CC0, so completely free database of the world's research organizations. We gave them all an identifier. We put their home pages. We noted where on a map they actually exist, including things like jurisdictions or various other sort of areas that would be relevant to knowing where they were based. We would put their Crossref identifier in, their ISNI ID, and things like that. In fact, I've got an image of 2 of them here, and there are now, we launched with 80,000 institutions, there are now almost 90,000 institutions which have some relationship with research. They're not just academic institutions. Some of them can be, for example, large corporates. They can be government. They could be research institutes, for example, like the Alfred Wegener Institute. I was speaking to them just today, actually, about something unrelated. And so now that we had essentially done the legwork, and it did take us many years and a lot of manual work to maintain and structure this, to relate a child institute to a parent institute or an affiliate to the same institution. We then had the ability to actually use this as an engine to recognize affiliations. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on the back end you don't see on the homepage. For example, we will pick out, even though there's only one acronym for Alfred Wegener Institute, if their German name appears, of course, our system can pick that up. So this is just the sort of front page, if you like, of that. But now that we have a database of something like almost 90,000 institutions, and they actually have an identifier, that means that the work with Dimensions and the work at Digital Science to affiliate correctly any item based on, for example, looking at its Crossref identifier prefix or various versions of its name, or indeed to be able to group it with any other items that are from or institutes that are from the same geographical area. This was suddenly possible for Digital Science to do. And so that's what we actually did. We have now essentially enriched the publications that are in the system with this information. So, for example, I was looking up Lancaster earlier today. You can go and see this at grid.ac. Lancaster University has its own page, has the type, when it was founded, has various bits of metadata around it, has things like administrative regions and so forth, so that we have a good basis from which to normalize and track and relate the Lancaster as an institution with various publications in the system. So that was the sort of first step that we took. I'm just going to jump back to the old slides. Feel free to go to grid.ac and have a look at it. When it came to the system, we wanted it to be easy, so we have actually built it right into the advanced search. You can go to the full Altmetric database, this little tick up at the top here, and you can then start typing, like I did here, Lancaster, and it will start finding things like Lancaster University, the City Council, and so forth. These places are all related to research in some way. I don't know what Lancaster City Council is doing there, but it could well be that they have been found in certain affiliation strings. So it's been built right in so that it will find that. It has also been built so that it's smart enough to understand that when you're typing in Cambridge University, it will find University of Cambridge. So it will do a smart search and not require you to be exactly matching what the grid database says the normalized name should be. So it makes it much easier to then go and in one click just see what is actually happening around research that comes from whichever institution you have selected. This is really quite critical for looking at things like benchmarking, tools for which we are developing next year. So more than just seeing and sort of manually comparing two different institutions, there will be benchmarking tools available based off the back of this. It'll allow you to understand what the average, if you know what you mean by average, institution that is, quote, like yours, or which you consider to be a competitor for funding or a competitor for researchers, how they are doing, what notes they're hitting, what their most recent attention was, and so forth. Now, I suppose a small caveat is that the data that we have discovered in an automated fashion will not exactly match what perhaps that institution knows it to be its own data. And this can be for a couple of different reasons. Lancaster University, for example, or any university, will have spent a long time corralling its authors into telling them what their publications are, or cleaning a lot of their data, and they'll be adding in publications which are simply not affiliated correctly. A good example that we had was, I believe it was the Karolinska Institute, have an article that belongs to them that is affiliated in full at the publisher's website as Department 2. That's it. There's no mention of Stockholm, there's no mention of Karolinska, there's no mention of anything about where it's from, just Department 2. And so, of course, there's not much that Grid or the affiliation strings can do on digital sciences side to pick that up. And so it is only an indication, but it's a pretty good one, and it usually finds some very large amounts of data. The second of the enrichments that we have benefited from close work with the collaboration with Dimensions, and it's actually a boon of digital science in general that we do inherit each other's technological progress, is that we have added the fields of research. Here these are actually the fields of research more cleanly laid out than you get on the ANZ SRC website, actually. These are screenshots from Dimensions where they actually have a browse function on the field of research so you can see everything that's there. The reason that fields of research were used by digital science is that there was a nice large hand-curated list of items that will actually fall into that research. So ANZ SRC have themselves got tens of thousands of documents that have been hand-coded according to these fields of research. So there was a large training set for the second step that I'm about to describe in how we use these data and how we implemented this field of research coding system. And also because it goes all the way through from the hard sciences, maths, engineering, physical sciences, and so forth, all the way through to things like language, culture, history, archaeology, and art, and so forth. And it'll be literary studies over here, 2005, that I'll be looking for in just a moment. Because one of the big complaints was Altmetric is great, but what about the humanities? You know, what is there? And that's actually quite hard manually to prove that there's quite a lot out there, because you don't know what words to use, because previously a keyword search in Altmetric would only throw up words from the title and perhaps the author name, and if we were lucky, the abstract as well, if there were one present. It could be that the metadata we got from the publisher didn't have an abstract for that item, but we know it's being talked about in various places. So we are listening out for when that item gets mentioned. But now I can actually just type in literary studies and we can find items that actually on an item level belong to that field of research, that discipline. Now, how did we actually get to the point where we could manage to connect these fields of research with all of the articles out there? Well, that large training set I mentioned that belonged to the ANZ SRC, we took that and said, and took an artificial intelligence engine and trained it on this large training set of items, and then said, all right, now with a certain level of confidence, you have to apply these fields of research correctly to other items that have not yet been hand coded according to this field of research system. So we're not using a journal level description field. We're not using the subject terms used by publishers to describe their journals. There's a good reason why. It's not terribly helpful. For one, they are very, very general. They have to be, unless you're talking about a very specific journal that's quite niche. The larger journals, and especially the mega journals, which of course are now being published in more and more, are too general for this. In fact, the word general is used as one of the subject terms. Nobody wants to have the Altmetric database with a load of general written all over it. And so it was much better to be able to teach an algorithm to read the content of a paper, to read its abstract, to read the full text where it's available, and to be able to then work out, is this in nanotechnology or is it in social work? Or is it in neither of those? Or for some reason, is it in both? Because we can tag things according to multiple categories if they seem relevant according to the content. So this is article by article. This is at an item level. It's extremely valuable. It's one of the reasons why dimensions work so well. It's a reason now why the Altmetric service can be used to track attention to individual pieces of research and to general fields of research as well. These appear natively and without any work for our customers. So here we're looking at our usual typical everyman customer, Lilliput University. That was meant to be a small university. I'm pausing for laughter. And you can see in this instance, the customer has told us the name of their author, the departments that they want this assigned to. And then we have found 3 affiliations in addition to the Lilliput University. There is Vanderbilt and the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and there are also 3 subject areas that this now appears in as well. These are, as I will show you in just a moment, also hyperlinked, which means we could click on, for example, immunology and get all the immunology related articles from this university. Or if I move to the full database outside of our institution and went and had a look at everything that Altmetric's been tracking, we now have a view of everything around immunology or applied economics or whatever it is. So it's built right in there so that this is not something you have to switch on or off. It's there to begin with. So before I actually say thank you, I will jump into the Altmetric database now. And I will show you how we can use some of this data. So in order to do this, I'm going to move away from just Lilliput University. I'm going to go and look in the full database and show you that we can pull up, for example, let's see, Bristol University. I'll start typing. So you can see, obviously, it's already bringing up many, many versions of what it thinks might be logical. University of Bristol, like I was saying, it's finding something that is a fuzzy match, essentially, to what we have. And I could simply hit return and have a sense of what Bristol University has been up to. So there are about 43,000 outputs, which we consider to be belonging to the University of Bristol, that hard legwork having been done by the grid database and by our affiliation matching, so that we can then see some of the attention around Bristol University's own data. It can be quite interesting to have a look at this actually and see on a timeline how these data are behaving when it comes to it. So there really are some old policy mentions from 1962, but it really gets kicking around 2012, which is when we normally say our data really does belong to that. That's sort of where it officially begins. And we can start to see some of the attention around the affiliated data from Bristol University. Some big hitters here: February of 2018, June 2018, August were both very high. If I went even further down, the map will start to break down. This graphic will start to adjust itself so that we are looking at individual days. And we can see here there was a big jump, and I could go and click on that and see these data. So I now have a sense of what people were talking about in relation to publications from Bristol University on a certain day. So from beginning to end, that being the most recent of the posts, right, 11:59 p.m., just managed to get that tweet in, and going back, we can then see it is clearly this diurnal variations that is probably one of the ones that is moving the needle so heavily when it comes to that. So this was a big hitter for that time. We could also, as we're still in the University of Bristol in general, go and have a look at their demographics. How are they engaging their audience worldwide? Have they engaged policy worldwide? Is this an area where we also want to be engaging? Are there sort of certain features about their policy impact that are quite interesting? For example, they seem to have 1,000 references from Switzerland. That's most likely the World Health Organization. I could just simply click on that and then pull out those policy documents based in Switzerland that belong to the University of Bristol Research, where they are on the affiliation list. Sometimes there are many institutions on that affiliation list as well. You'll have to forgive my slightly slow internet here. There we go. It is bringing up those 1,000 mentions in order, so it is actually quite quick, but everything feels so slow if it's not instant these days. So we can see here 28 to 2018, decent work in Portugal, some stuff there. One of these items will belong to Bristol. The others are also simply linked in the document. I can go and read the document myself by going to the International Labour Organization website. I can simply click that and it would take me there, as I am now demonstrating. It's always interesting you find yourself diving into very interesting areas of research sometimes just by demoing something. We could add multiple institutions at once. This functions via an OR command. So we're not looking for University of Bristol and University of Warwick, so they have to both be on the affiliation. This, at the moment, the way that we've structured it is to give us an OR function. So this will bring us up a larger data set. We can add, for example, Lincoln as well, Lincoln Library, Lincoln College, Lincoln University. There's one in Nebraska too. And so we can do that as well. And if I then save that, or rather run that search from the full database, I am now still, unfortunately, keeping these. I need to clear this. There we go. And if I just apply that, then we are back at the now really quite a lot, 66,000 outputs that are for all three of those institutions. I've picked some fairly small ones to add to Bristol there as well. So once I've got 3 or 5 or 10 different institutions, and I perhaps want to save those because I want to keep an eye on these institutions' outputs, perhaps they're partners of ours, perhaps I want to see how their data compares when we co-publish with them, then I can save this as a search. So this search here can be saved and it'll pop itself over here. And I now have usefully all Altmetric from the full Altmetric database. For those 3 institutions, I could rename this. So I could call it, for example, the ominous group of 3. That's what I'm going to call it. So people will wonder what is going on there. I can save that. I could make that my default view, by the way. I could make it so that when I come into the database next time, I, as a single user at the university, have decided that I actually just want to see those 3 institutions at the same time. I could do that by clicking that button. I could get an email report. I could create a report on this, or I can simply run it again simply by clicking on it. And we are back again at the combined outputs for those institutions. Let me just clear this again. The fields of research work very similarly. Here, for example, we have our subject classifications here, what we call fields of research. So at the moment it says for FOR classification. We are going to change that so it's a little bit more obvious to somebody who's not familiar with the fields of research. So here, for example, I promised that I would do literary studies. Since I come from a humanities background myself, this was quite important to see what was out there. Until now, like I said, it's very hard to come up with keywords that really show this. Anything you search within literary studies tends to be quite specific and brings very few items back. We have 48,800 outputs that could have possibly been mentioned, of which 12,500 have actually received some sort of attention, just in literary studies. So we can see there is a decent amount about resignation letters, a lot of stuff on things like that, how to write a research paper, even though that is technically within also another discipline. We can already see that that is to do with things like literary studies as well. And we can have this as a results list, so we can actually see some of the various different ways in which we've added this together. So language, communication, and so forth. We can get a good sense of what is out there. And I could, if I wanted to, since I am still in the full database, looking at everything that Altmetric knows about and looking at literary studies, I could save this as a search because I want to keep an eye on how literary studies is behaving when it comes to research out there and to research attention. I could go and have a look again at, are we impacting policy? And if so, when and what type of research is it? What sort of video data is there out there? How popular is it used on Wikipedia? The patent data is probably to do with something that is about literary studies, but is also something more in the hard sciences. We can see perhaps some of the more language Twitter and literature Twitter that's out there as well. And I could, of course, export these data. I could, if I was a customer, have an API access to these data. So I then have an API feed of items relating to literary studies. And remember, I could do more than one field of research as well. And I can have that feed through to some part of my department if I want to run regular reports on it, whether I want to get the data in a machine-readable format to put into some sort of reporting tool, I can do that as well. So we've tried to be as unobtrusive as possible when it comes to building it into the system. It is there and is fairly easy to use. Now, I suppose the final way of using these data that I can think of, at least, I'm sure that our customers will come up with some imaginative ones as well, is that I could now switch to, quote, my institution, the institution that Altmetric has implemented for customers. So I have now simply switched back to where we began. These are the verified outputs. They have nice little ticks next to them that show that I told Altmetric that this was part of our institution. It really is ours. This is the real source of truth. It comes from our repository. It comes from our CRIS. It comes from our own institution as well. And I could then have a look at, how we're publishing in, for example, organic chemistry. So I can simply click this, and within our own data, I'm now looking at the 32 outputs that do drop into organic chemistry. So I can do that as well. But what might be quite interesting is to combine an affiliation with the data set of our publications. So at the moment, I'm in Lilliput University. It's essentially aggregated publications from lots of real universities put together as a sort of example of what our customers see. But if this were the University of Cambridge or Brunel or Northampton or somebody else who has an Altmetric database and they have their own customized view, I could say also, well, how do we publish with University of, well, let's not take Oxford, let's take someone else. Let's actually take Brunel University. Pop that in there as well. I'm now looking Brunel University of London, but within my institution. So of the thousands of items that we have told Altmetric belong to us, show me the items that also have an affiliation with Brunel. Now, it's not very many. I should have practiced this, really, shouldn't I? But the goal still stays the same. We can see the items that Brunel co-publishes with us, or I can change that to something like, I think Harvard was one of the data sets that we used in part, so we'll probably see a few more. You can see that there are 800 outputs, 773 have been mentioned, and these all have a co-affiliation of my university. That's why we're seeing the tick every time. We are still in Lilliput University, and we are now also finding the items that are affiliated with Harvard. So it allows you to understand a little bit about when co-affiliation, how that plays into how our items are talked about. Do we do quite well when we have affiliations with Harvard and ourselves, and those items get mentioned on the web somewhere? So we have that sort of feature as well. So there we have it. 89,500 institutions, a possible 89,000. Not all of them will have published something that has been mentioned, but we have that possibility that they could be in there. It's growing all the time anyway. Those have been added to, they've been worked on in the dimensions database, and we now know which items those have affiliations for, and they can of course have multiple affiliations. You do see that when you take this view again, the what's called the list view. You can see University of Southern Denmark, Harvard, and Icahn School of Medicine, Mount Sinai. All three have authored this item, a very famous item actually, by Philippe Grandjean, I believe it is, on developmental toxicity. A draft sequence of Neanderthal genome also has multiple different ones. There are actually 15 affiliations there. So these are the ones that we've all found: Max Planck, Bonn, Oviedo, Pompeo Fabra, and so forth. They're all in there as well and belong to more than one subject area too. So this has enriched the data for our customers without them having to do anything. This is stuff that you can export, and you can list those fields of research in your repository if you wanted to. It's all there for you. And like I say, it doesn't change the price. This is something that is just part of the way that Altmetric works. We tend to try and add plenty of value add as we go on. And these two, like I say, were the big questions. Back when we first launched Altmetric in 2014, I think it was August, we did have subject terms. But those eventually went away because we were, I think, taking them from the ERA 2015 Australian effort for their research evaluation. And I think they were journal level, so they weren't as useful. These are much more granular. If you do want a full list, you can head to app.dimensions.ai and simply hover over fields of research and hit browse, and that will take you to that page that I showed as well. These are the fields of research items. Now, there are other ones as well that Dimensions has worked on. Those have yet to be included in Altmetric. We're still thinking about that. The fields of research seems to be the most general, seems to be granular enough. We want to add some more granularity as time goes on. But we began with this set, which I think is pretty good because it does cover, like I say, the broad swathe of data that's out there. So you can sort of see what's going on there. And head to grid.ac if you want to have a look at your own institution. It's fun to try and see some of the ones that we've created in the past. Maastricht have a nice one. So you can filter that. You can suggest an institution for us if we're missing one. You can, of course, always report additional information or errors, for example, that we have there as well, so that we can improve that. It won't immediately affect the matching because a lot of the brute force of the matching comes from clever linguistic extraction from the affiliation strings. But this allows us to then also do some of it automatically, like, for example, via those sort of headline identifiers that you get from things like ORGRAPH and ISNI and so forth. And with that, let's see, how did I do? It's half past, that's pretty good. I know that we demand an hour of you for this, but I'm always pleased to end early and then have a look and see if there are any questions. So if there are any questions, feel free to drop us a line on the chat. I will just have a quick look at the chest. Here we go. Which research outputs were published by Lancaster City Council? Robin Hounshold, thank you very much for that question. Let's find out. I think we do need to know this. Let's see if they are simply a data point and have yet to actually publish anything, or whether there is something. Lancaster City Council may be on something. Let's have a look. Maybe nothing, especially nothing that has received actual attention, but let's have a look. So I will make sure that we're in the full metric database. We've got Lancaster City Council. No, there is nothing, unfortunately. We could go and have a look in Dimensions, though, couldn't we? I wonder if perhaps Lancaster City Council shows up here, because they will show up in the recommendations. Let's have a look. Lancaster City Council. One publication, Felonious Line of Duty Officer Deaths, 95 to 99, the impact of tenure and age. It's been cited, but like we found with Altmetric, it has not been shared on social media. Should we all do them a favor and actually share that for once? They'll wonder what's going on. Their social media department is going to lose their minds when they found out that they've had 8 tweets, completely unrelated to the content of the publication. But you can see here, this is why it appeared in Altmetric, is because it is a data point in Dimensions. It was published in the International Journal of Science, Policy, Science and Management. You can go and read the item. Here are the authors. That is where Grid and all of that data was doing its hard work, was finding it there. It'll also show up Toledo and Michigan and so forth. 3 references, 5 citations, no grant information, unfortunately. But that's why it's just this single one here. Robin, I'll send that to you after the webinar. Thank you for the question. I quite like that. I'm very glad to see that they actually are in there. If you download the data, do you get the subject classifications and the affiliations in the data set? Let's try it now, because I think the answer is yes. I think I did this the other day. So I could go to one of my saved searches, maybe one that's not huge. So I can, for example, well, let's pick that literary studies one, actually, because there we know what the name of the item is. So we are limited to 1 million downloads. So I think this one's going to be fine. This is a 12,500 data set item. It'll download itself for me, and then we can go and have a look at what was in there. I've seen the classifications at least in there. It'll be fun to see if the affiliations show up there as well. It has finished downloading those 12,000 items, so I can open those up. My Excel can be a little slow on this computer, so we will see when it shows up. There it is. So for a start, I can already see that we have the subjects, the FORs here, and you can see that they are shortened by semicolons. Goodness me, somebody who did English literature. I wonder what's happening. You'll also notice the affiliations are there as well. So there we are. New School for Social Research in New York. Whoops, I just typed the word one. Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and so forth. So they are in there, along with things like citations as well. We do have the Dimensions citations over here as well. So that's standard academic citations from the Dimensions service. Also in there, we have enabled the download of those in the Altmetric service as well. So people have a place to download the cited items. So there we are. That's two pretty interesting revelations so far. Thank you for that question as well. Another question, will a customizable time frame for searches be added? Currently it's limited to all time, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. Okay, so that is true for the timeline, which I presume is what you're mentioning here, this 1 week, 1 month. So we're looking at the last week, for example, or the last 3 months, or the last 6 months, or all time. Actually, if you want to do customizable searching by a very specific time frame, you would actually not do it here, although you can drag it down to individual days if you wanted to. It's not actually the most elegant way of doing it, although it looks fun to do. You would head over to the Mentions tab, and here at the Mentions tab, you can say, I want mentions between May 2011 9th to either today, or I could say September 2015 on the 22nd, very specific. And I want to be even more specific than that. Since I'm looking at these data, I should actually reset. This is going to look a bit strange, but we could, for example, say I only want news stories, or I only want policy documents, or even better than that, all policy I'm not interested in. I'm actually only interested in the overheid from the Dutch government or UK government. I forget how we type it. It could just be gov.uk, I think it might be. Let's find out. Yep, it's gov.uk. And Australian policy online, I think. Yep, there's the Facebook wall of them, for example, and they're probably called something else, aren't they? They're probably called APO or something. Yeah, they're buried down here somewhere. I could even, as you can see, add individual Twitter users. For example, my big dumb face can also be found on Twitter. And I could say we only actually want the following sources, let's say Wikipedia and blogs or whatever. I actually only want them for the Netherlands. So you could be very specific. You can say even Germany and so forth. Now, the danger is if I run this, we're going to get 0 results, so I won't. But you can see, for example, that you can go very, very specific. You can be specific on source, specific on time frame of mention, and I could then apply that. It'll probably bring back nothing because, oh, it's actually not done too badly. So we have 1,609 mentions that match that query in the database based on what we're looking at. At the moment, we are still looking at, for example, the full Altmetric database for literary studies. I could remove that and clear the fields completely and then go back to here, and we'd have a lot more, right? So we have 182,000 mentions in general that match this, and then I should probably put back, there we go, put that again, and I would have that time frame created there. So yeah, you can be very, very specific with that kind of stuff. So we have 99,000 mentions that match basically all of those. I've not, of course, searched for a keyword, which is why it's so massive as a service. Sorry, as a results set. Another question. We are good with the questions today. I'm glad I left some time for this. If an affiliation is listed within a paragraph in a journal article, will it not be picked up? Man, that's a good question. I think if it's in the full text, I think probably not, but I am actually going to write that down and get back to you because I'm not 100% sure. I think what we're looking at is the affiliation strings that are listed on the journal homepages, but I'm not absolutely convinced, sorry, the article homepages, but I'm not convinced that that's the only scope of it, so I will find out. Sorry, I can't answer that question right now. Affiliations within a paragraph. I presume that this is within the full text itself. I don't know how often that comes up as something when people aren't listed as affiliations in the metadata, but they are referred to in the full text. I'm hoping that's not very common because it seems to be editorially problematic, let's say, within the full text. I will get back. I'll get back on that one. I like that question. It'd be a good one to answer. Yes, Amy from Altmetric tells me that it's analysis and policy online, not Australia policy online. That is why it wasn't showing up. They rebranded themselves analysis and policy. It could be an ampersand. We will find out. Yep, I think it might be. Let's have a look just for my own edification. There it is, the Analysis and Policy Observatory even. My goodness, they have done some good work there. So yes, that's how you can find them. Thank you very much for that, Amy. So we have another question that begins with thanks. I always like that. Would these limited mentions then be presented in the other tabs, such as research output? Yes. Once we have actually filtered down to this view, so we've got these 99,000 mentions. If I were to then move, I'm just making sure that they actually have run, so they're now a slightly new one, so because I've amended this analysis and policy. Once it's been filtered there, I can then move and see those same outputs either as a list or as a sort of a badge view for those items. And if I move to the timeline, we're now looking at the timeline for those pieces of research. So you can see it looks a little bit different. I can then zoom in and have a look at items much more closely. I can see how those items were referred to over time, where they were mentioned, when they were mentioned. We can even see, and this is something that I always love, you can see the demographics for these very particular items, just as you can see the demographics for Bristol University now on demand based on our affiliation work, or the demographics for literary studies. We could actually see the demographics for anything, or the timeline for anything. Or indeed the journals where they are published in. So if you're a researcher and you're working in literary studies, where should I publish? Well, here is the beginnings of a list of places where you can look at them. And obviously some of them, like Figshare, for example, are places where they're more repositories. PLOS One is, of course, a mega journal. You can see some of these are quite clearly where literary studies intersects with the hard sciences, but you can get a good sense, at least, of where these items are showing up. So we can do a lot of that stuff as well. This will all be amended according to what we have filtered down in this mentions tab. So that is a good question. Thank you for pointing that out. That's something I should have actually said myself. Will you be adding the funder information from the paper at any point? That is a fascinating question and not one I could possibly comment on. It is something we've thought about because, of course, the team at Uber Research have done such a good job of being able to show the funder data within dimensions. So, of course, we could see, for example, in an article, if we just jump back here, if I pick a random one, if I do it by relative citation ratio, so if I pick this one, I think I saw this one. Yeah, so this was funded by Verband der Chemischen Industrie in Germany. I think it's in Germany, certainly German language. You can see that we're picking it up there. There would be, for example, grant records if very specific grants had funded this, rather than just a general thanks that they did in the acknowledgement section. So the question becomes, could we bring that into the Altmetric database at some point too? It's on our minds. We don't have a hard yes or no on that at all. But yeah, thank you for asking it. It's something that I'll pass back to the development team. Another question, in the journals tab search, can you see what journals a specific institution is publishing in? Yes, you can. So if we go and reset my absurdly complicated search that I just did, I'm just going to simply clear all the fields. If I were to say, for example, I would actually like to know, I went to University of Warwick, not bragging, but if I went and had a look at Warwick's output as we understand it, so from the work we have done, and I also need to fix the fact that we need to look in the full database for University of Warwick. So, and just clear these items as well. There we go. So I have now got University of Warwick full Altmetric database. I can have a look at the research outputs. There's about 24,000 that we know belong to them. If I then jump over to the journals tab, this is where Warwick publishes, or rather the researchers from Warwick publish. PLOS One tops the list, it seems to be, with 230 papers, and then it drops down there and becomes more and more niche as we look down, all the way down to, what's the lowest one? Could be quite exciting. It does keep refreshing itself, and as you can see on this side here, the slider goes on for a while, but we do have work and occupations. They have one output for quite a lot of these ones as well. What is quite useful is you can then also see the behavior of the of the mentions across these. So it might well be that PLOS One has attracted the most publications. They were a very famous mega journal, they're open access, they meet a lot of the criteria that Warwick perhaps demands of its authors these days. Never asked me to publish, of course, and this is not a sore point at all. And so we could see, for example, order them by the number of total mentions. So actually the BMJ is the top one when it comes to just the amount of times that their research has been on there. It could be that we want to know what are the policymakers reading when it comes to the data from Warwick, and Warwick's big hitters, the ones that policy people are working to read: Lancet, BMJ, British Journal of Psychiatry, and so forth. So we can get that as well. What about in terms of patent mentions? We're now looking at the University of Warwick's most innovative publications when they are mentioned within patent literature. So the big one is you want to publish in Biosensors, or at least that one publication in Biosensors was a big hitter and had 217 references within patent literature around the world, along with a couple of other ones as well: Feb's Letters, Microbiology, Cell, and so forth. A lot of the standard ones that we expect there. So yes, you can see absolutely the places where an organization publishes. You can see what is the most effective depending on what you're trying to reach. Are we trying to fuel innovation via patents? Are we trying to fuel policy changes via the policy mentions? Are we just trying to get into the blogosphere, for example? We can see that as well. And you could filter this, so you can search by names, so archive, for example, or as always, you can just simply export this as a table and do your own wonderful offline work on this as well. Very good. These were engaging questions. They made me go and work on things. That seems to at least have brought an end to the questions. They were very good ones. Thank you very much. I will get back to everybody about the one that I couldn't answer, about the full text mention of a affiliation somewhere in the body of a text. Oh, there is one more, actually. If nobody mentions a journal that the institution has published in, it won't show up. That's not quite right. We are looking for the mentions of articles. So it could be, and that's perhaps what you meant, it could be that the institution publishes in that journal, but that journal's articles that they have published in have never been referred to. Then they do drop away, that's right. You would see the full content of what a institution publishes. Even if it gets no mentions, you would see that in the dimensions database. The Altmetric database is an inverse version of a database. It doesn't seek completeness. It seeks just to show you where items have actually been mentioned at least once. So that is true. I should make that clear. What we're looking at here is not a complete list of everything that Warwick publishes in. These are the journals and collections that have data that have been discussed in places like Wikipedia, peer review, Twitter, and so forth. That is correct. So yeah, that is a good point as well. Thank you for that one. And I think, hopefully, that is, the end of everything in terms of my need to explain things, I reckon. If you do need to drop me a line, or if I said something confusing, which is very likely the case, you can reach me at ben@altmetric.com. We are, of course, on Twitter ourselves, Altmetric, and Ben McLeish if you want to drop me a line. Thank you very much for attending, so late in the day as well, and I will give you the last 15 minutes back. And thank you for that. We will be in touch with the recording, with the follow-ups to the questions. And thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.